My mother wore black at my celebration because I did not invite my golden child brother, who ruined all my milestone. What happened next shut her up instantly. My brother Kevin has systematically destroyed every milestone in my life, while our mother stood there making excuses for why her precious baby boy just gets a little overexcited sometimes. My high school graduation, he showed up drunk and threw up in the parking lot, right as I was walking to get my diploma, so everyone was watching him instead of me. Mom said he was just nervous about his own future, and we needed to be understanding. My college acceptance celebration dinner, he announced that college was a scam and I was wasting everyone's money, then stormed out, leaving me crying at the restaurant. Mom followed him to make sure he was okay and never came back. When I got my first real job, Kevin spent the entire family dinner explaining why my career choice was stupid, and I'd probably get fired within a month. Mom laughed and said he was just jealous because I was growing up so fast and leaving him behind. Every birthday, Kevin would show up late, demand to be the center of attention, and throw a tantrum if anyone spent too long talking to me. On my 21st birthday, he pretended to have a panic attack because I was getting more presents than him. Mom made everyone stop celebrating to comfort him, and we never even cut the cake. My college graduation, he brought his new girlfriend, who he'd been dating for 3 days, and proposed to her during my party. Everyone spent the rest of the night congratulating them, while I sat alone in my cap and gown. Mom said it was beautiful that he wanted to share such a special moment with the family. When I got engaged, Kevin told my fiancé that I'd been in love with someone else right before we met, and was probably settling. Then he spent weeks calling my fiancé to share made-up stories about my past relationships. Mom said boys will be boys, and he was just being protective. At my actual wedding, Kevin gave a 40-minute best man speech, even though he wasn't the best man, where he told embarrassing fake stories about my childhood, and ended by saying he gave the marriage 2 years tops. This pattern continued for 29 years. Kevin ruined everything from my job promotions to my baby shower to my housewarming party. He'd either cause a scene, fake an emergency, or find some way to make himself the victim so everyone would focus on him. Mom enabled every single incident with excuses about how Kevin was struggling or stressed or just expressing himself differently. She'd say I was the strong one who didn't need as much attention, and I should be proud that I was stable enough to support my brother through his difficulties. Now I'm planning my 10-year anniversary party. My husband and I saved for 3 years to throw a really nice celebration at a beautiful venue with all our friends and family. We sent invitations 2 months ago to everyone except Kevin. When Mom got hers, she immediately called demanding to know where Kevin's invitation was. I told her he wasn't invited because he's ruined every important event in my life, and I wanted one special day without his drama. She completely lost it, saying I was being cruel and vindictive and that family supports family no matter what. She threatened not to come if Kevin wasn't invited. I held firm and said that was her choice, but Kevin wasn't welcome. She's cried about how this will destroy Kevin. She's raged about how selfish I am. She's tried guilt, saying Dad would be disappointed in me if he was still alive. The party was last Saturday. I was actually nervous Mom would bring Kevin anyway, but she showed up alone wearing all black like she was at a funeral. She spent the cocktail hour telling everyone who would listen that Kevin was excluded from his own sister's celebration and how it was breaking her heart. During dinner, Mom stood up during the toast time even though she wasn't scheduled to speak. She clinked her glass and said she wanted to say something important. She started talking about family and forgiveness and how some people hold grudges over silly misunderstandings. She was building up to some grand speech about Kevin when my husband's cousin Beth interrupted. "Excuse me, are you talking about Kevin who got arrested at Thanksgiving for attacking his stepfather? Because that wasn't a misunderstanding, that was assault." Mom tried to deflect, but then my friend Amber spoke up. "Wait, is this the same Kevin who stole money from the memorial fund when your dad died? I remember you crying about that for weeks." More people started chiming in. My coworker mentioned how Kevin had shown up drunk to my work and got me written up. My husband's brother talked about Kevin calling him before our wedding, trying to convince him I was cheating. My aunt brought up how Kevin had faked cancer to get attention during my pregnancy. Every single person had a Kevin story, and Mom was standing there frozen as 20 years of her enabling got exposed in front of everyone. But the real shock came when my cousin Lisa stood up, and the entire room went dead silent because everyone could tell she was about to say something huge. Lisa looked straight at Mom and said she needed to tell everyone what really happened at Kevin's last intervention 3 years ago that the family tried to keep quiet. Mom's face went white and she opened her mouth, but Lisa kept talking. She said Kevin didn't just show up drunk to that intervention. He actually attacked our uncle when confronted about stealing money from multiple family members. Mom paid for the uncle's medical bills and made everyone promise never to speak about it to protect Kevin's reputation. I felt my stomach drop because I had no idea about any of this. Lisa's voice got louder as she said she only stayed quiet before because Mom begged her to think of Kevin's future. But watching Mom wear black to my celebration and try to guilt everyone changed Lisa's mind about protecting family secrets. Another cousin I barely knew stood up from the back of the room and added that Kevin borrowed $5,000 from him 2 years ago, claiming it was for rehab. But he saw Kevin at a casino the next week. Mom knew about it and told the cousin to be patient because Kevin was struggling. My aunt pushed her chair back and revealed that Kevin showed up at her house last Christmas demanding money, and when she refused, he took jewelry from her bedroom. Mom returned the jewelry quietly and asked my aunt not to press charges because it would destroy Kevin. The stories kept coming, and each one showed the same pattern over and over. Kevin does something terrible. Mother covers it up and makes excuses, and everyone else is expected to stay quiet to protect him. My husband squeezed my hand under the table as I realized the enabling went so much deeper than I ever knew. There were crimes and thefts and violence that Mom had been hiding for years. Mom tried to speak, but her voice came out as a weird croak and nothing else followed. She looked around the room at all these people who were telling the truth about Kevin, and she couldn't spin it or make excuses because there were too many witnesses all saying the same things. Beth stood up again and said she needed to add something else that was important. Kevin's arrest at Thanksgiving wasn't his first. It was his third arrest in 2 years, and Mother has been bailing him out and hiding it from the whole family. My husband's best friend cleared his throat and mentioned that Kevin called him 6 months ago trying to borrow money using my name, claiming I was in financial trouble and too proud to ask. When he called me to check on me, he realized Kevin was running some kind of scam using my reputation. I found my voice and asked Mom directly how much money she'd given Kevin over the years. She wouldn't answer and just stared at her plate, but my aunt said she knew Mom took out a second mortgage on the house to pay Kevin's debts. The number had to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point. Mom stood up and her voice shook when she said she did what any mother would do to protect her child. But Lisa cut her off before she could finish and said no. A real mother would have let Kevin face consequences instead of enabling him to hurt more people. The room erupted with people agreeing and sharing even more stories I'd never heard. My coworker stood up and talked about the time Kevin showed up at my workplace so drunk that I got written up for the disruption. She said Mom actually called my boss afterward to make excuses for Kevin instead of apologizing to me for what happened. Another person mentioned Kevin stealing from their car at a family barbecue. Someone else brought up Kevin spreading lies about them to their employer. Every single person had been hurt by Kevin in some way, and Mom had either covered it up or minimized it, or made them feel bad for being upset about it. Mom stood up fast and announced she was leaving because she wouldn't stay somewhere where her son was attacked by people who don't understand his struggles. She grabbed her purse from the back of her chair and headed for the door with quick, angry steps. I stood up too, and my legs felt shaky, but I managed to say that if she leaves now, she's choosing Kevin over me one final time, and I'll know exactly where I stand. She froze at the door with her hand on the handle, but she didn't turn around to look at me. My husband walked over to Mom and said quietly but firmly that she's hurt me for 29 years, and tonight was supposed to be about celebrating our marriage, not about her guilt over Kevin. He asked her to please just leave if she can't be happy for us. Mom turned around with tears streaming down her face and said, "I've always been the strong one who didn't need her as much as Kevin did." Lisa laughed, but it sounded bitter and harsh, and she said that's exactly the problem. Mother created a monster by treating me like I didn't matter. Mom looked at Lisa like she'd been slapped, and then she turned and walked out the door. The room went completely silent for what felt like forever. Nobody moved or spoke or even seemed to breathe. Then my husband's mother stood up with her glass raised and proposed a toast to me, saying I deserve to be celebrated without drama for once in my life. Other people started raising their glasses, and the tension in the room broke a little bit. The party slowly recovered over the next hour, and people came up to me one by one to apologize for staying quiet about Kevin for so long. They all said basically the same thing, that they didn't realize how bad it was until they heard everyone else's stories tonight. My aunt hugged me and cried and said she was sorry for not protecting me better. Lisa came over and said she should have spoken up years ago, but she was afraid of causing family drama. I told everyone I understood, and I was just grateful they finally told the truth. My husband and I ended up having a beautiful evening despite all the drama at the beginning. We danced and laughed and celebrated with people who actually cared about us. I felt lighter than I have in years, like some huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time ever, I didn't feel crazy for being angry about Kevin's behavior, because everyone validated that it was real and wrong and not just me being sensitive or holding grudges. The next morning, I woke up to 47 text messages from various family members. My phone kept buzzing on the nightstand, and I finally picked it up to look. Some messages were supportive, saying they were proud of me for standing up to Mom. Some were angry at me for embarrassing Mother in front of everyone at what was supposed to be a celebration. Some were asking what happens now with the family, and whether there would be some kind of meeting to talk things through. I didn't respond to any of them right away because I needed time to process everything that happened. Around noon, I finally started going through the messages, and most of them were supportive. But then I got to the one from my mother. She sent it at 3 in the morning, so she must have been up all night stewing about what happened at the party. The text was long and rambling and said I humiliated her in front of everyone, and she couldn't believe I let people attack Kevin when he wasn't even there to defend himself. She went on about how family is supposed to protect each other, and I turned everyone against my own brother. There was nothing in the message about the intervention story Lisa told, or the theft, or the arrests, or any of the actual things people said about Kevin. She just kept saying I embarrassed her, and made her look like a bad mother when all she ever did was try to help both her children. I read it 3 times, and each time I got angrier because she still didn't get it. She was making herself the victim again, just like she always did with Kevin. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes trying to figure out what to say back because part of me wanted to write this huge long response explaining everything. But then I realized she wouldn't hear it anyway, so I just typed back that I didn't let anyone attack Kevin. I let people tell the truth, and if the truth made her look bad, then maybe she should think about that. I hit send and put my phone down, and my husband asked if I was okay. I told him I was done trying to make my mother understand because she was never going to admit what she did wrong. She didn't respond to my text at all, which was probably for the best, because I didn't have the energy for another fight. Lisa called me around 2 in the afternoon, and she sounded nervous when I answered. She apologized right away for dropping the intervention story without warning me first. I could hear her voice shaking a little, and she said she'd been planning to stay quiet, but watching my mother try to manipulate everyone at the party made her so angry she couldn't keep it in anymore. She talked really fast, explaining that she felt guilty for years about keeping that secret, and seeing my mother wear black to my celebration like she was mourning pushed her over the edge. I told Lisa she didn't need to apologize because what she did was brave, and I was grateful someone finally spoke up. She started crying on the phone and said she should have done it years ago instead of letting my mother guilt her into silence. We talked for almost an hour about all the times Kevin hurt people, and my mother covered it up. Lisa mentioned she'd been in therapy dealing with the family stuff, and her therapist helped her see how wrong it was to keep protecting Kevin. By the end of the call, we both felt better, and Lisa said she was glad the truth finally came out, even though it was messy. My aunt called me that evening and said she needed to tell me something she didn't want to bring up at the party. Her voice sounded tired and sad, and she explained that Kevin had been stealing prescription medication from her medicine cabinet during family gatherings for at least 5 years. She noticed pills going missing after holidays and birthdays, but she didn't want to believe it was Kevin at first. Then she caught him coming out of her bathroom one Thanksgiving with his pockets full, and she confronted him about it. Kevin cried and said he had a problem and begged her not to tell anyone. My aunt made him promise to get help, and she thought that would be the end of it. But the pills kept disappearing at every family event after that, and when she told my mother about it, my mother said it was just a phase, and Kevin would grow out of it. My aunt was crying by this point, saying she was so sorry she didn't do more to stop him. She felt guilty for not calling the police or forcing him into treatment. I told her it wasn't her fault because my mother manipulated everyone into thinking they were helping Kevin by staying quiet. After we hung up, I just sat there feeling sick to my stomach. The conversation with my aunt changed something in my head because I started seeing the whole pattern differently. My mother hadn't just been making excuses for Kevin's bad behavior at parties and family events. She'd been actively covering up criminal activity and lying to everyone about how serious his problems really were. The stealing, the drugs, the violence, the arrests, all of it was way worse than anyone knew because my mother spent years hiding the truth. She paid off people and made them promise not to talk, and told everyone Kevin just needed more support and understanding. But really, she was protecting him from any consequences and letting him keep hurting people. The betrayal felt even deeper now because it wasn't just about her favoring Kevin over me. She'd been putting the whole family at risk by enabling an addict and a thief and pretending everything was fine. I felt angry and sad and confused all at the same time. Part of me wanted to call her and scream about what the aunt just told me, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. 3 days went by and I didn't hear from Kevin at all, which actually made me more nervous than if he'd called right away. Then on Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang and it was him. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up and he immediately started screaming at me. His voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear, and he was yelling about how I turned everyone against him and ruined his relationship with the family. He called me horrible names and said I was a liar, and everyone at the party was a liar too. He went on and on about how he never did any of the things people accused him of, and it was all exaggerated or taken out of context. He didn't apologize for anything or even acknowledge that maybe some of the stories were true. He just raged about being made into the villain and how unfair it was that I was excluded him from the party. I could hear him breathing hard between sentences, and I wondered if he was drunk or high or just that angry. He kept saying I was trying to destroy him and turn the whole family against him because I was jealous of the attention he got from our mother. I let Kevin yell for about 5 minutes without saying anything because I wanted to hear what he would say when I wasn't fighting back. He ran out of steam eventually, and there was this pause where he was just breathing into the phone. Then I spoke really calmly and told him that he ruined his own relationships by being a selfish, destructive person for 3 decades. I said I was done protecting him from the consequences of his own choices, and I didn't care if he was mad at me for telling the truth. My voice didn't shake at all, even though my hands were shaking while I held the phone. I told him that every single story people shared at the party was true, and he knew it. Then I said I hoped he would get help, but I wasn't going to be part of his life anymore either way. He started yelling again, but I just hung up on him mid-sentence. My husband was sitting next to me on the couch, and he grabbed my hand and squeezed it. I felt weirdly calm after the call ended, like I'd finally said everything I needed to say to Kevin. About an hour later, my phone started buzzing with text messages from Kevin. The first one said he was going to come to my house and make me apologize to our mother for what I did. The second one said I better watch my back because he knew where I lived. The messages kept coming, and they got more and more threatening with each one. He said he was going to show up at my work and tell everyone what a terrible person I was. He said he was going to make sure I regretted excluding him from the party. My husband looked at the messages over my shoulder and his face got really serious. He told me to stop reading them, and he took my phone and started taking screenshots of every single message Kevin sent. There were maybe 15 texts total, and some of them were scary enough that my husband said we needed to file a police report right away. I didn't want to at first because I thought it would just make things worse. But my husband said Kevin was making direct threats, and we needed to protect ourselves. We drove to the police station that evening and talked to an officer at the front desk. My husband showed him the screenshots of Kevin's texts and explained that Kevin had called earlier making threats too. The officer took us seriously right away, which surprised me because I thought they might say it was just a family argument. He had us fill out a report and asked questions about Kevin's history and whether he'd ever been violent before. I mentioned the Thanksgiving arrest that Beth talked about at the party, and the officer looked it up in the system. His face changed when he saw Kevin's record, and he said Kevin had 3 arrests in the past 2 years for assault and theft. The officer said they would contact Kevin and give him an official warning to stay away from us, or he would face harassment charges. He also suggested we might want to consider getting a restraining order if Kevin didn't stop. My husband thanked him, and we left the station feeling a little bit safer, but also worried about how Kevin would react to the police getting involved. The next morning, the officer called and said they'd contacted Kevin and given him the warning. He said Kevin got angry on the phone with them, but agreed to stay away from us. The officer told us to call immediately if Kevin showed up at our house or workplace, or if he sent any more threatening messages. I felt relieved that the police took it seriously, but I also felt guilty for getting Kevin in trouble with the law again. That guilt lasted about 2 hours until my mother called me screaming. She was so loud and angry I could barely understand what she was saying at first. Then I realized she was yelling at me for getting the police involved with Kevin. She said I was trying to destroy him and get him thrown in jail. She kept saying how could I do this to my own brother, and didn't I care that he could end up with a criminal record. I wanted to laugh because Kevin already had a criminal record, but she was still pretending he didn't. I interrupted her and said that Kevin destroyed himself by threatening me, and I was just protecting my own peace and safety now. She started crying and saying I was tearing the family apart. I told her the family was already torn apart by 29 years of her enabling, and I was done being the one who suffered to keep everyone else comfortable. Then I hung up on her too because I couldn't listen to any more excuses. Over the next few days, my phone kept buzzing with texts from different family members. My aunt sent a long message saying she was proud of me for finally standing up to Mom, and that she'd been waiting for someone to do it for years. Lisa texted saying half the family had called her after the party to say they felt relieved someone finally exposed the truth about Kevin. My husband's brother sent a message apologizing for not speaking up sooner and saying he respected how I handled everything. Beth texted that her parents had been talking about Mom's enabling for decades, but nobody wanted to cause family drama by confronting it. Even my coworker from the party reached out to say she had no idea how bad things were, and she understood now why I seemed stressed whenever family events came up. Each message made me feel a little less alone in seeing how messed up the situation was. I'd spent so many years thinking maybe I was the problem, or maybe I was being too sensitive about Kevin's behavior. But now I had confirmation from 15 different people that what happened to me was real and wrong and not something I should have just accepted. My husband read through some of the messages with me and said it was good that people were finally being honest instead of pretending everything was fine. That evening, we sat down at the kitchen table with our laptops and decided we needed to write out exactly what boundaries we were setting with my family going forward. We spent 2 hours typing out a document that listed specific behaviors we wouldn't accept anymore and what the consequences would be if those boundaries got crossed. We wrote that Kevin was not welcome at our home or any events we hosted, and that anyone who tried to bring him would be asked to leave. We wrote that we wouldn't attend any family gathering where Kevin was present, and we wouldn't discuss him or make excuses for why we were avoiding him. We wrote that Mom needed to stop trying to guilt us about Kevin or defend his actions, and that if she continued, we would limit contact with her too. We wrote that we expected basic respect for our choices, and that family members who couldn't provide that would not be part of our lives. My husband suggested we add a part about not accepting last-minute guilt trips or manipulation tactics, and I agreed that was important. We read through the whole thing 3 times to make sure it was clear and firm, but not mean or aggressive. Then we sent it as an email to both my mother and Kevin with the subject line, "Family boundaries going forward." I felt nervous clicking send because I knew it would cause another explosion, but my husband reminded me that we had every right to protect ourselves and our peace. My mother's response came back within an hour, and it was exactly what I expected. She wrote that I was being cruel and unreasonable, and that family is supposed to forgive and support each other no matter what. She said I was holding grudges over things Kevin didn't even remember doing, and that I was punishing him for having a harder time in life than I did. She wrote that Dad would be so disappointed to see me tearing the family apart over petty disagreements and hurt feelings. She said real love means accepting people's flaws and helping them through their struggles, instead of abandoning them when they need you most. She didn't acknowledge a single specific thing Kevin had done, or any way she'd enabled his behavior. She didn't apologize for wearing black to my party or trying to guilt everyone during her speech. She just kept saying I was wrong for setting boundaries and that I should be the bigger person and let everything go. I showed the email to my husband, and he shook his head and said she was never going to take real accountability for any of it. That's when I realized he was right, and I needed to accept that my mother would probably never admit the damage she'd caused or understand why her favoritism hurt me so badly. I made an appointment with my therapist for the next week because I knew I needed help processing the grief of not having the mother I deserved. In the session, I cried, talking about how I'd always hoped that someday Mom would see what she'd done and apologize, and we could have a real relationship. My therapist helped me understand that I was mourning the loss of a fantasy relationship that never actually existed, and that accepting reality was painful but necessary for moving forward. She said I could grieve what I didn't get while still protecting myself from further harm, and those two things weren't contradictory. 2 weeks after the party, I was at work finishing up some paperwork when the receptionist called my extension and said there was someone in the lobby asking for me. I walked out to the waiting area and froze when I saw Kevin standing there looking angry and agitated. He started yelling about how I'd ruined his life and turned everyone against him, and I needed to fix it right now. I backed up and told him he needed to leave immediately because he wasn't supposed to contact me. He took a step toward me and said he wasn't leaving until I called Mom and apologized for everything. Our security guard heard the commotion and came over asking if there was a problem. I told him this man was making threats and I needed him removed from the building. Kevin started yelling louder, saying I was a liar and he just wanted to talk to his sister. The security guard called for backup, and 2 more guards came and escorted Kevin out while he screamed about how I was destroying the family. My hands were shaking as I went back to my office and called my husband. He left work immediately and met me at the police station, where we filed another report about Kevin violating the warning they'd given him. The officer who took the report said this was enough for a restraining order and helped us fill out the paperwork right there. He said the judge would review it within 48 hours, and Kevin would be served with the order as soon as it was approved. I felt safer knowing there would be legal consequences if Kevin came near me again, but I also felt exhausted from having to deal with all of this. My mother called that evening, and I knew before I answered that she would blame me for what happened. She was crying and yelling at the same time, saying I was tearing the family apart and destroying Kevin's life over nothing. I interrupted her and said Kevin tore the family apart 29 years ago, when he started sabotaging every milestone in my life, and she helped him do it by never holding him accountable for anything. She said I was being dramatic and Kevin just made some mistakes like everyone does. I told her that showing up at my workplace and refusing to leave wasn't a mistake. It was harassment, and I was done pretending his behavior was acceptable. Then I hung up before she could say anything else. 3 days later, Lisa called and asked if I wanted to come to a family gathering she was organizing at her house that weekend. She said she'd invited about 15 relatives, but specifically didn't invite Mom or Kevin because people needed a space to talk honestly without walking on eggshells. I asked my husband if he wanted to go, and he said absolutely, because it sounded like exactly what we needed. That Saturday, we drove to Lisa's house, and I was surprised by how many people showed up. My aunt was there with her husband and their adult kids. Beth came with her parents. Several cousins I hadn't seen in months were sitting in the living room. Lisa had set out food and drinks, and the atmosphere felt relaxed in a way family gatherings never usually did. We spent the first hour just catching up and talking about normal things, but then Lisa suggested we go around and share how we'd been affected by the family dysfunction. My aunt went first and talked about how Mom's favoritism toward Kevin had made her feel like her own kids didn't matter to their grandmother. Beth's mom shared that she'd been in therapy for 5 years, working through the trauma of watching her sister enable Kevin's increasingly dangerous behavior. One of my cousins admitted he'd stopped coming to family events 3 years ago because Kevin had stolen money from him, and Mom defended Kevin, saying he was just going through a hard time. Another cousin said she'd been seeing a therapist too, and realized that the family dynamic was emotionally abusive, and she didn't have to accept it anymore. Person after person shared stories about how Kevin's behavior and Mom's enabling had hurt them, and how they'd all been suffering in silence, thinking they were alone. I started crying, hearing how many people had the same experiences I did, and how we'd all been isolated from each other by the unspoken rule that we couldn't talk about Kevin's problems. My husband held my hand and said this was what healthy family looked like, people being honest and supporting each other instead of protecting one person at everyone else's expense. My aunt suggested we create a group chat without Mom and Kevin so we could stay connected and be honest about our experiences. Everyone agreed immediately, and within minutes we had a chat going with 15 people in it. The energy in the room felt lighter after that, like we'd all been carrying the same heavy secret and finally put it down together. 3 weeks after the party, I was checking my email before bed when I saw a message from my mother with the subject line, "I've been thinking." My heart jumped a little bit because I thought maybe she was finally ready to acknowledge what she'd done and take real accountability. I opened the email and started reading with hope that maybe this would be the turning point where we could start to repair our relationship. The email started with her saying she'd been doing a lot of thinking about everything that happened at the party. She wrote that she understood I was upset, but she wanted me to know she'd always done her best as a mother, and she couldn't control Kevin's choices or problems. She said raising 2 kids were hard, and she'd tried to be fair to both of us even though Kevin needed more help and attention, because he struggled more than I did. She wrote that she forgave me for embarrassing her in front of the whole family, and she hoped we could move past this difficult time. She ended by saying, "Family is forever, and she loved me no matter what. I read it 3 times hoping I'd missed something, but it was exactly what I expected. More excuses about Kevin needing help. More justifications about doing her best. No real acknowledgement of how her favoritism hurt me for 3 decades. No apology for enabling Kevin's terrible behavior or covering up his crimes. Just her forgiving me like I was the one who did something wrong. I closed the laptop and sat there feeling stupid for hoping she'd changed. My husband came into the bedroom and asked if I was okay because I looked upset. I showed him the email and he read it quietly. Then he asked what I wanted to do about it. I spent the next hour writing a response and deleting it and writing again. Finally, I sent an email back telling her I didn't need her forgiveness because I hadn't done anything wrong. I wrote that excluding Kevin from my party was a healthy boundary after 29 years of him ruining my special moments. I told her that until she could genuinely acknowledge the harm she caused by enabling Kevin and treating me like my feelings didn't matter, I needed space from her. I said I loved her, but I couldn't have a relationship with someone who refused to take any responsibility for the pain they caused. It was the hardest email I ever sent, and my hands shook when I hit send. My husband held me while I cried, because part of me still wanted my mom to be the person I needed her to be. The next morning, he reminded me that setting boundaries doesn't make me a bad daughter. He said it makes me a healthy adult who refuses to accept mistreatment anymore. He told me he was proud of me for finally standing up for myself even though it was scary and painful. His support helped me stay strong when I started feeling guilty about the email. Several weeks went by and I didn't hear anything from my mother or Kevin. The silence felt weird at first because I was used to constant drama and crisis calls about Kevin. But then the silence became peaceful. I realized how much energy I'd been spending trying to manage their dysfunction and keep everyone happy. Without that weight, I felt lighter. I started sleeping better. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes, waiting for the next Kevin emergency. The quiet was actually really nice. I focused on building stronger relationships with the family members who showed up for me at the party, and afterward. Lisa organized another gathering at her house, and this time even more relatives came. We planned regular dinners and started new traditions that didn't involve walking on eggshells around Kevin's behavior. My aunt hosted a barbecue, and nobody mentioned Kevin or my mother the entire time. We just enjoyed each other's company and talked about normal things. It felt like what family gatherings should have always been like. I also started seeing a therapist to work through everything. My therapist helped me understand the complicated grief of losing my mother while she's still alive. She explained that I was mourning the relationship I wanted and deserved, not the relationship I actually had. She said it was okay to grieve that loss even though my mother was still living. The therapy sessions helped me start accepting the reality of who my mother actually is, instead of who I wished she would be. It was hard work, but I felt myself getting stronger every week. One afternoon, Lisa called and told me something interesting. She said other family members had also started establishing boundaries with my mother after seeing me do it. My aunt told my mother she wouldn't attend any events where Kevin was present. 2 cousins stopped answering her calls when she tried to guilt them about Kevin. Lisa said my mother was starting to realize that her enabling had cost her relationships with multiple people, not just me. Hearing that made me feel less alone in my decision. A few weeks later, a card arrived in the mail for my birthday. It was from my mother with a generic message about wishing me happiness and a check for $50. There was no acknowledgement of our conflict or any real attempt to repair the relationship. Just surface-level gestures like nothing had happened. The card felt empty and meaningless. I showed it to my husband and asked what he thought I should do. He said I needed to decide what kind of contact I was comfortable with and stick to that boundary. I decided not to cash the check or respond to the card because I didn't want to send mixed signals about my boundaries. Accepting the money or thanking her would make it seem like everything was fine when it wasn't. My husband supported this decision completely. He reminded me that I get to decide what contact feels right for me, and I don't owe anyone an explanation. About a week after my birthday, Lisa called with news. Kevin had been arrested again, this time for theft from a store. She said my mother tried to bail him out like always, but she couldn't because she'd run out of money. Apparently, all those years of covering Kevin's debts and legal fees had drained her savings. Lisa told me that my mother was finally facing the reality that her enabling didn't help Kevin at all. It just delayed his consequences and made his problems worse. Part of me felt sad hearing that, but mostly I just felt relieved that it wasn't my problem anymore. That same week, my husband reminded me that our actual anniversary was coming up on Thursday. We decided to skip any big celebration after everything that happened at the party, and just stay home together. He ordered takeout from the Italian place where we had our first date, and we ate on the couch watching old movies. We talked about the party and how awful the drama was, but also how it finally forced everything into the open. He said he was proud of me for holding my boundaries even when it was hard. I told him I couldn't have done any of it without his support. We agreed that the healthier family boundaries were worth all the conflict and stress. It felt good to just be together without any chaos or manipulation. Later that night, I got a text from my aunt saying she wanted me to know something. She wrote that watching me exclude Kevin and stand up to my mother gave her the courage to address her own toxic family situation with her sister. She said she'd been making excuses for her sister's behavior for years, just like my mother did with Kevin. Seeing me finally say enough was enough inspired her to set her own boundaries. She thanked me for showing her that it was possible to love family members while still protecting yourself from their harm. Reading that message made me cry because I never thought my decision would help anyone else. It felt good knowing something positive came out of all the conflict. 5 weeks passed without hearing from my mother at all. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang and it was her. She asked if we could meet for coffee to talk. I told her I'd think about it and call her back. I talked to my husband about whether I should go, and he said it was my choice, but he thought I should bring him along for support. I called my mother back the next day and said I'd meet her, but my husband was coming with me and I was only willing to talk if she was ready to have an honest conversation. She agreed, and we set a time for Saturday morning at a coffee shop near our house. When Saturday came, my husband drove us to the coffee shop and we walked in together. My mother was already sitting at a corner table with 3 cups of coffee waiting. We sat down and she immediately started talking about how hard things have been with Kevin and how she's been doing a lot of thinking. I interrupted her and said I needed her to stop and just listen for a minute without defending herself or making excuses. She went quiet and folded her hands on the table. I told her that for 30 years her favoritism and enabling damaged me in ways I'm still working through in therapy. I explained how every time Kevin ruined something important and she made excuses for him, she taught me that my feelings didn't matter and my accomplishments weren't worth protecting. I said that watching her wear black to my anniversary party like she was mourning instead of celebrating showed me exactly where I stood in her priorities. My husband reached over and squeezed my hand while I talked. My mother started crying and said she never meant to hurt me. She said she was just trying to help Kevin because he always seemed to need it more than I did. I told her that intent doesn't erase impact, and her choices had real consequences for me even if she didn't mean them to. She wiped her eyes with a napkin and said she could see now how Kevin manipulated her. She admitted that it was easier to give in to his demands and cover up his problems than to set boundaries and let him face consequences. She said she knows now that her enabling made everything worse for everyone, including Kevin. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of everything she'd done, but it was closer to taking responsibility than she'd ever come before. I told her I was willing to work on rebuilding our relationship, but it had to be slow and it required her to respect my boundaries about Kevin. I said she needed to stop making excuses for his behavior and stop expecting me to sacrifice my peace to accommodate him. She nodded and said she would try. I made it clear that trying wasn't enough, and I needed to see actual change over time. My husband added that we appreciated her willingness to work on things, but trust had to be earned back through consistent actions. My mother agreed, and we finished our coffee talking about neutral topics like the weather and her garden. Over the next few weeks, my mother called me twice, and both times she managed to have conversations without bringing up Kevin or defending him. She asked about my work and my husband's family, and actually listened to my answers. When I mentioned that Kevin's name came up in a family group chat, she didn't jump in with excuses or try to make me feel guilty. The progress was slow and sometimes awkward, but it was something. She sent me a card for no reason that just said she was thinking of me. Small gestures that showed she was making an effort even if it wasn't perfect. I started to accept that I might never get the full apology and complete accountability I deserved from my mother. She might never fully understand how deeply her choices hurt me, or take complete responsibility for the damage she caused. My therapist helped me see that my healing didn't depend on my mother's acknowledgement anymore. I could move forward and build a healthier relationship with realistic expectations, or I could keep waiting for something that might never come. Either way, my peace didn't require her validation. Kevin doesn't try to contact me again after the restraining order gets issued. I hear through Lisa and some other family members that he's in court-ordered treatment now and actually showing up to his sessions because the judge told him he'd go to jail if he missed any. Apparently, he's facing charges for the theft and the harassment and a few other things that finally caught up with him. I don't follow his situation closely because honestly it's not my problem anymore, and keeping him out of my head feels better than knowing every detail of his mess. The restraining order stays in place and I make sure to renew it when the time comes, because I'm not taking chances that he'll suddenly become a different person. My husband never once suggests that maybe I should give Kevin another chance or try to forgive and move past everything. He never says that family is family, and I should consider reconciling. Instead, he asks me regularly how I'm feeling and if I need anything, and reminds me that I get to decide who deserves space in my life. When I have moments of guilt about the restraining order or wonder if I'm being too harsh, he sits with me and lists out specific things Kevin did over the years until I remember why I made these choices. He never makes me feel weak for having complicated feelings about my family, and he never pushes me to feel differently than I do. One night, about 3 weeks after the anniversary party, we're sitting on the couch watching TV, and he reaches over and takes my hand. He tells me he's proud of how I stood up for myself and set boundaries even when it was hard. He says watching me choose my own peace over people-pleasing showed him what real strength looks like. I start crying because nobody has ever been proud of me for protecting myself before, and it hits me how much his support has changed my whole life. He's shown me what healthy family relationships should look like by never once making me question whether I deserve respect and safety. The extended family gathering that Lisa organized becomes a regular thing. We start meeting once a month at different people's houses, and it turns into this tradition where we can all be honest without worrying about protecting Kevin's feelings or walking on eggshells around my mother's enabling. At the second gathering, my aunt mentions that she wishes we had done this years ago instead of suffering in silence. Everyone agrees, and we spend time talking about how the dysfunction affected each of us differently. My cousin shares that she stopped coming to family events for almost 5 years because Kevin's behavior was so stressful, and my mother would guilt trip anyone who complained. Another relative admits they moved across the country partly to get away from the drama. Hearing everyone's stories helps me realize that Kevin's impact went way beyond just ruining my milestones. He poisoned the whole family dynamic, and my mother's enabling made it impossible for anyone to feel safe or valued. Now we're building something different based on honesty and mutual respect. We actually enjoy spending time together without the constant tension of wondering what Kevin will do next, or how my mother will excuse it. 6 weeks after the anniversary party, I wake up on a Saturday morning and realize I feel genuinely peaceful. I have clear boundaries with my mother that she's mostly respecting, even if she doesn't fully understand why they're necessary. I have supportive relationships with family members who actually care about me, and don't expect me to sacrifice my well-being for anyone else. I have the freedom to celebrate my life and my accomplishments without Kevin's drama destroying everything. My mother and I talk on the phone sometimes and meet for coffee occasionally, but it's cautious and limited. She might never fully understand the damage she caused by choosing Kevin over me for 3 decades. She might never give me the complete apology and accountability I deserve, but I've accepted that my healing doesn't depend on her acknowledgement anymore. What matters most is that I finally chose myself, and that decision gave me the peace I'd been searching for all along.